never smoke the dizzy, but we can always share some dizzies. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to rhyme. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Well, welcome, guys. Miss Liz in the house. That's right. And I have the incredible Jane Rubin in the back of the studio. And today we're going to share a grateful cup, a joyful cup, and a mindful cup. So we're going to share a full cup of strength. We're going to talk about her book over there and all that good stuff. But before we get all of that started, you guys know how Miss Liz rolls. Get over to Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, Instagram, all of those platforms. You guys know how that rolls, and give those a like, follow, and subscribe, and get these tea times out there. Share them. If they resonate with you, they do make a difference. I guarantee you that. An open conversation, and sometimes just hearing an open heart story does make a difference in someone's life. So let's get started with disclaimer and a little intro into getting Jane in here, and then we're going to spill some tea. And again, today's tea is joyful, mindful, grateful. It's a full cup of strength, courage, grit, and medical heroes. So let's get started with disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicated to sharing real life stories, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations that inspire awareness, healing, and connection. I, Miss Liz, is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment during the live broadcast, please grant StreamYard permission to display your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that all the content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All guests, viewers, and participants are responsible for using their own judgment when considering any action or decision that may relate to these discussions. Some episodes may cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotionally triggering subjects. Listeners' and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutical advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have any questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of this discussion, you are welcome to contact me, aka Miss Liz, directly at my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com or visit my link tree at Miss Liz's Tea Time. By choosing to participate in, comment on, or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is entirely voluntary. I, Miss Liz, welcomes you to join the conversation with an open heart, and if at any time you feel this platform is not right for you, I respect your decision and wishes and welcome you back whenever you are ready. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup at a time. Well, first of all, I want to welcome everybody to Tea Time today, where stories travel across time and hearts travel even further. Today, we welcome a woman whose words preserve history and whose courage rewrites survival into legacy. Please welcome Jane Rubin, two-time cancer survivor and award-winning historical novelist whose work brings the hidden heroes of history into the light. Jane's writing reaches deep into the human spirit, illuminating the surgeons, nurses, families, and women whose courage carried nations through World War I and beyond. Her celebrated Gilded City trilogy, their thread bears in the hands of a woman and over there blend meticulous research with emotional truth. Through her pages, history became intimate, bravery personal, humanity became unforgettable. Jane writes to remember, to honor, to reveal that behind every chapter of history, there are hearts that endure and hands that heal. So grab your cup and settle in, and we are traveling through time with someone who makes the past breathe again. Let me get Jane in here and let's spill some tea. Welcome, Jane.
Yeah, that was such a beautiful intro. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. It is a pleasure to have you here. Uh, Jane, I'm going to take you down the first rabbit hole of Miss Liz's tea time. And that rabbit hole is, who was Jane as a little girl and who is Jane now?
Who was Jane as a little girl? Is that what you said? Um, I was a very inquisitive child. I was a Jewish girl growing up in a predominantly Christian community, and always felt a little bit like an outsider. And I learned to cope with that through my father's toughness and my mother's sensitivities, and was told from a very young age that I was going to have the world in the palm of my hand, and I had the intellect to take that anywhere I wanted.
And who is Jane today?
Jane today is a retired 30-year healthcare executive of a large healthcare system in New Jersey, someone who really enjoyed learning about medical innovation through my career. And now, 6 years, 7 years into retirement, I have reinvented myself as a writer of historical fiction based around two pivots. The first was the experience of the Jewish immigrants and how they found their way into medicine, which is so common for the Jewish population. And the second was about my great grandmother Tilly and her experience with either breast or ovarian cancer. The genetic mutation that she had, I inherited. And so she was the original inspiration for my writing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And that's why I like getting to know my guests as little children and as grown adults, right? Because we do a lot of things that maybe as a child we couldn't do as an adult. And now as an adult, we wish we could have done as a child. And it gets to know a person a little bit deeper. Uh, I will be getting into the ovarian cancer because I want to bring up some incredible stuff that you're doing and that as well. But let's bring up your book, the book that I was sent, and let's talk about that for a little bit. Um, let me pull it up so people can see what we're going to be talking about. So the book that I was sent was Over There. So let's talk about Over There, Jane.
Over There is the third book of a trilogy that began with Threadbare, my grandmother's immigration story, led to In the Hands of Women when I decided to turn it into a series, and that dealt with Tilly's younger sister, Hannah, who became one of the first OBGYNs. And then I was offered a second two-book deal, and it was recommended to me that I continue the story of the family, the Isaacson family. And when I looked at the time period, I thought World War I. And so I took the medical players characters from my first books, added a few, and sent them to France as the nurses and doctors who took care of the wounded soldiers. And what was really challenging for me at that time was I knew almost nothing about World War I. It seemed like I had gotten a lot of information about World War II in my history classes, but World War I was kind of glazed over. And I had two grandfathers who both fought in the artillery, in the infantry in World War I, and my father and his two brothers fought in World War II, and no one ever talked about what their experiences were there. So I was very curious, as I was from childhood, about things that I knew little of, and I did a lot of research to construct this book.
So Jane, the image that's on for my audio listeners, could you explain a little bit about the cover and so what they can get a visual of what we're looking at?
Yeah, the covers of the trilogy all tie together. And if you go into an online bookstore, you can see that when you look my name up. But they all have a trellis of some sort surrounding the image in the front. And this trellis and the interior trellis were based on the poppy fields of Flanders. And most people have heard the poem "In Flanders Field Where the Poppies Grow." And so it's a very subtle nod to the battles in Flanders. And the nurse is a picture of the nurse of that time. They wore veils, head covers that almost looked like nuns. And but not, they weren't. It was just they covered their hair completely. They had sort of a full body garb, and and I liked that this image showed a young nurse, because at the time nurses were not allowed to be married, and so they were young or older, and a young nurse who had worked in a hospital in the United States would never have seen the degree of trauma that she would have encountered in France along the trench lines. And so I liked that look of what hit me. What did I get myself into? Holy mackerel.
Well, I'm going to pull you up now so we can see your beautiful face, Jane. We had a question that just came in. You said that you worked in the medical healthcare systems, correct?
Mm-hmm.
During training for nursing and all that, do they teach about past nurses and stories like that?
I don't. I was an administrative. I had an administrative role in the hospitals. I was not a nurse or a doctor by training, but I knew many of each through the 35 years I spent working in a hospital, building programs for the communities. And it really depended on the medical school or the nursing school. What we do know is that so much of modern medicine was built on the lessons we learned during World War I. The entire concept of an ambulance service was a World War I invention that showed knowledge that patients do much better in terms of survival if they're cared for immediately after their wound is inflicted. So getting the soldiers off the battlefield and into the hands of a healthcare professional was an urgency that was first employed. The war that we had really beforehand, that was a lengthy war, was a civil war, and that was just a disgusting a world of medicine. So by the time we got into World War I, the Americans, before the American soldiers came over, during the 3.5 years prior, there were many young men who went over as ambulance drivers. Hemingway did. I mean, Cummings did. I mean, it was amazing how many Americans went over to Europe to help in the war. The second area of modern medicine that was anchored in World War I was the use of X-ray close to the battlefield. And that was a necessity because for the first time, machine guns were being used. And so that sprayed shrapnel all over the person's body. And to find it, you really needed X-ray. And so X-rays were there. Blood transfusions were used for the first time. It was a much different environment than it was ever before for American medicine. And all of that was brought back to the United States. So although so many soldiers died, not only from that, but from the Spanish flu, which we should talk about since we lived through a pandemic, the knowledge that we got from that war in medicine was huge, and it really was in many ways the birth of modern medicine.
Yeah, let's talk about the Spanish flu, because we need to get people educated here with this tea time. And I always enjoy going down these roads with my guests because I like to learn as well.
Mhm.
Because some people might have not learned this in school or was taught this. So can we talk about the Spanish flu for a bit, Jane?
Sure. And I didn't learn it in school either. So, and when I ask audiences when I'm out speaking, does anybody know why the Americans got into the war? Nobody knows. I mean, it's really almost universal that we, as a people, are very lacking in knowledge about World War One, and so was I. Very humbly. You're not alone, folks. Anyway, the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu hit the United States in the summer of 1918 in its fullest force. It was um, it was believed that it started in a farm in the Midwest, and it was a fowl to human transmission. And the fellow who caught it was recruited into a training camp on the East Coast and brought it with him. And it was not a very severe form of the flu at that time, but a lot of soldiers in his unit got sick. And they got on a ship and they went to Europe together. And by the time they got there, the flu had started mutating and they were sent to the trenches and it spread like wildfire. It spread because the soldiers in the trenches were so deconditioned from lack of sleep, from poor nutrition, from psychological issues like chronic fear, that they were very susceptible to catching a very aggressive virus. And when they did, and they came into the hospitals near the front, the thinking was that they had a cold. So they weren't isolated. And then the flu presented its symptoms in a like fast and furious and just almost disgusting way. The body attacked the lungs, the patient would be coughing blood, and it was just horrible. Their eyes would bleed. It was a much more ferocious um, flu than COVID was, and COVID was pretty bad in the beginning. But this left COVID in the dust, and 20% of those who caught it died, and oftentimes quickly. And for some reason, it seemed to hit young, healthy people or young people the worst. And there's some theories about that, but the soldiers were very right. But at the same time that was happening, and these soldiers were coming into hospitals in Europe, the American army that had just gotten into the trenches had built up tremendous steam, and they were really beginning to push the line and win the war, and there were a lot of casualties. And so the bigger hospitals where these soldiers were transferred into eventually, and we can talk about that if you're interested, but the bigger hospitals had to open beds for the incoming soldiers from the trenches. And those soldiers came, about half of them were artillery wounds, and the other half were lingering symptoms from the flu. And so they began to send those soldiers back to their hometowns while they were still contagious. And that created the pandemic. The soldiers became the super spreaders. And so they'd get back to cities like New York or Chicago or Cincinnati, and within days, the hospital workers would be sick. And it would spread to the families and out to the community. And that's what really triggered the virus becoming a pandemic.
Well, and everybody traveling too, right, Jane?
Well, and back in 1917, 1918, people didn't travel quite like they did today.
Yeah.
But it was when there's a world war, there's a lot of traveling of the soldiers, and the soldiers were the ones who were ill.
So,
So,
Jamie,
and wait, there's one more thing that's really interesting to think about, and that is the Army did not want the hometowns in the United States to be afraid of taking their family members back. So they kept the truth of the flu, the virus, pretty much a public health secret. So there wasn't the internet and there wasn't all these workarounds to get information to people. And the newspapers did not get the full story. So that opened the beds in Europe, but it pushed the soldiers back into their hometowns very unwittingly. And so it was difficult to stop things until after they had already became a raging forest fire.
well, that's the best way to keep it under tabs, right? Don't tell anybody. And then they're like, oh, well, what's happening here?
Spain, interestingly, was neutral during World War I. And so when the flu hit Spain, it was all over the news. And so the assumption was made that it started in Spain. And so they called it the Spanish flu.
I
But it
was wondering how they called it the Spanish flu, but it
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, it's World War I is full of fascinating stories, really fascinating. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about the months of research. I loved it. I loved how that was the world that my grandfathers lived in as young men, and it really gave me so much insight into what was going on around the world.
Well, we had a question that came in about World War One, and I'm going to get it out to you. It's why do you feel the medical personnel of World War One have been historically overlooked?
I really don't know. That is a great question. And as a writer, I look for the untold stories. And so, I mean, why write another spy thriller about World War II? There's so many great ones. I like competing in an open field. And I also like learning about things I don't know. And I know a lot more about that period. And there are a lot of historical fiction writers who pick like ones who focus on women who got buried in time, who really maybe today would have been very famous. I like the periods of time that people don't know about, and getting inside the lives of individuals during that time. In the medical world, there are sometimes references to things that were developed, invented during World War I, and one of them is plastic surgery. World War I saw the birth of plastic surgery, and it was all because of a New Zealander doctor who was an oral surgeon who was just hell-bent on doing something about all the head and face wounds. And the head and face wounds were very, very common because of the trench warfare. The soldiers would look up over the edge of the trench to see what was going on. And a sharpshooter on the other side of the field would just be waiting for their face. And that's why there were so many facial wounds. And that happened in the reverse too. So there were facial wounds on both sides, but nobody knew what to do with these fellows. And they were young in the beginning of their lives. Some of them had never kissed a girl before. And here they were badly mutilated. And he really discovered skin and bone transplant and how to rebuild a face. And it was just a marvelous kickoff. The plastic surgery as we know it now, that's more cosmetic and not so much reconstructive, came later after the war when he and other doctors were trying to figure out, now what am I going to do? So they figured out, well, we'll do rhinoplasty and nose jobs.
So, Jane, what was the most surprising medical advancement you uncovered while researching the Great War?
I think it had to do with amputations. And up until that point of time, it was all about saving lives, not limbs. So if there were a lot of casualties waiting outside the hospital, and there was a patient with an arm or a leg that was still attached but might have been badly damaged, the conventional thinking would have been to remove the limb. And that was a quick surgery. They could get the next soldier in quickly and save more lives. But the problem is that there was no VA like we know today. And these soldiers returned home with no support and virtually no benefits, very, very little benefits. And so they were better off actually if they didn't live, because at least their family would get some benefit. But they were littering the streets of Paris and London and terrifying the public that these badly injured boys would be coming back and without arms, legs, faces, and what were they going to do with them? And so many of them were homeless. And so there were a number of doctors who really focused on infection. And there was no penicillin then. So, the infection controls that we have today that had to do with the discovery of penicillin were not there and didn't really appear commercially until right before World War II. And so there were doctors who were really willing to try and find ways to quickly repair these limbs and use as many of the antiseptic tools that they had at that time and try and get these kids back home with at least 4 limbs. And I thought that was just amazing, just absolutely amazing. And it showed so much respect for the life of these soldiers after they went home.
Well, Jane, I want to get into your Grandma Tilly's story. How did you discover your great-grandmother Tilly's story shaped the creation of your trilogy?
Yeah, Tilly, I love Tilly. In 2009, I had been diagnosed around the turn of the 21st century with breast cancer, and I knew it was genetically linked. But I was in my mid 40s. I didn't want to I was just starting to expand and become successful in my career as a hospital executive, and I didn't want to slow down. So I thought, well, I'm going to find an organization and help raise money for breast and ovarian cancer. Little did I know that 10 years later, I would develop ovarian cancer. And I developed it after I'd had my ovaries removed. And that sounds very non-intuitive, but apparently during fetal development, there's a lot of cells in the fetus that drift to nearby organs. So you'd find an ovarian cell on the lining of the peritoneal cavity, which is the casing that surrounds the digestive system, the reproductive system. And apparently that's what happened to me. The ovarian cancer started on the wall of my peritoneum. It was picked up by just a cardiac scoring test, and it was all just routine stuff. And that was 2009, and that began my treatment for the next 16, 17 years for ovarian cancer. And it has been quite a difficult journey from a medical standpoint. I am way out there, in the 1% of the population that survives this long. It was not ever cured. So I'm in treatment now. I'm constantly in treatment. I've had pills. I've had the heavy metal treatments. Some make my hair fall out, some don't. But when I was diagnosed in 2009, I thought I was home free. I had had all this surgery to remove the at-risk organs, and I had just gotten remarried. in the turn of the century, and had a wonderful 10 years of marriage, and continuing to have a great marriage. And I just couldn't believe that was going to happen to me. And, why me? And so I started doing a dive into where I got it from. And so that took me into exploring ancestry and finding out the name of my great grandmother, Matilda, who everyone called Tilly. And I found her in the 1900 census records through using my grandfather Julian's name. And when I asked my mother, who was the only survivor of that generation, what she knew about Matilda, she said, "Honey, she died before your father was born in 1923. None of us ever met her." And so I said, "Well, what did she die from?" And she said, "Oh, woman's disease."
Oh,
A woman's disease was cancer of the breast or reproductive organs. And so I joined forces with the Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance in New York, and this information is on my website. And they raise money for research in the treatment, and they do preventative early detection, and they're a wonderful organization that raises millions of dollars every year. But they have the ability to partner with a fundraiser, me, and give me my own front-facing account. So I developed a fundraising site called the Matilda Fund, named after my great-grandmother, and also to honor women who died of breast and ovarian cancers before the turn of the century, the 20th century, when we knew so little about cancer. And as a matter of fact, the GYN cancers were looked at like venereal diseases because they affected the reproductive organs. So these poor women were shrouded in shame and confusion, and they tended to just die at home with painkillers. And so much has happened in the decades since then, but I take the royalties that I get from Threadbare, which is the first book of the trilogy that is Tilly's story, and I put them into the account. So the account's raised close to $83,000. And just as a little side story, my eldest grandchild, Lily, who is 16 and a junior in high school, had her own fundraiser that she did kind of in secret. And she set up a bake sale in front of a bagel shop in the town she lived in the weekend before Thanksgiving, and raised over $1,000 in a morning.
I seen that.
And
I seen that video.
Yeah, I was so proud of her. I just couldn't believe that, listen, teenagers can be real handfuls, and she's no exception, but that she had been developing that philanthropic side of her. And her mom inherited the mutation also. So she's worried about her future. She's worried about her mom, of course. She's very close to me. And I just thought that was a beautiful thing that she did.
It's nice when the youths are watching and they take that initiative, right? And they do these things in secret and then surprise. It was a beautiful video that I seen that your granddaughter, she presented that check at Thanksgiving dinner. So I thought that was really beautiful, especially on that day as well. And that kind of comes into your tea that you gave me: joyful, mindful, and gratefulness.
Yeah.
She took it upon herself to do all of those three fullness, fill a cup. You gave me those three words, Jane. Why'd you give me those three words?
Why? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Why?
The three words of joyful, mindful, and grateful.
And what want me to explain about that?
Well, you gave me that as your tea. So why did you give me those
Oh,
three
oh.
words for your tea?
Um, because one of the things that I learned living with cancer is that every day is really very special, and particularly days like today where I feel completely healthy. I took a 2-mile walk this morning with my husband. I wrote for the rest of the morning. Went to the food store. There are a lot of people with cancer who cannot get out of the house. And so it's very, very important to me to be grateful and to find joy every day. And I really, I was in a pretty hard driving career, and it'd be easy to reflexively become like a difficult person and a strong my way or the highway kind of person. And I deliberately controlled that in myself because I feel like it's a spoiler. It makes people unhappy. It brings unhappiness to yourself because it pushes you away from others. And the people in your life are so important to bolster you. And so I'm very grateful that medicine has been able to help me continue to have a great life. Each day is joyful. And I always appreciate that. And I try and bring that to others through the Matilda Fund and through my books. And so when I meet an audience and begin talking about the stories in the books, there's just such a great connection. And oftentimes it's an elderly audience, in their 60s or 70s, and they're looking for lifts, and they're looking for ways to fill their mind and their souls.
Absolutely. And when you sent me those words, I was like, oh, she has a full, strong cup, this woman.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I do.
you
I really do. And I don't complain about my health. And that's the other thing. That is for me the opposite of what I want to be doing with my days. And so what will happen is that I will have like I'll go to the eye doctor, and she said to me, you're beginning to have the beginning of cataracts, but not surgical yet. And I left there feeling, wow, 15, 16 years ago when I was diagnosed, I never thought I'd get old. I thought that I'd die young, and that's how people would remember me. And now I'm starting to join my cohort of seniors, and this is what it feels like to get older. And so I'm very accepting of that and very, very grateful that I could have this chapter of life.
Well, you're very mindful of the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we had a couple of other questions that just came in. As a two-time cancer survivor, how does courage show up differently on the page and in your life?
My characters my main characters are primarily females, although in the hands of women, I have 4 main characters, 2 men and 2 women. But they are a combination of strength and grit, and also very human frailty. So that no matter who you're looking at, as strong as they appear on the outside, they're just human on the inside. So in Threadbare, Tilly is my protagonist, and she wants to go to high school in the worst way. And that was a time where the average American finished, 4th grade was the beginning of the exodus from school. It was during all the immigration, and there were no child labor laws. And so families needed workers because they were on the edge of poverty. And so there were a lot of kids who left at 4th grade. The next big exit point was 8th grade. And that was just super common. My grandmother left school at 8th grade. My mother was the first one in her family to finish high school. And they were you know, that was again the immigrant story. Your hands were needed to feed the family. And Tilly was super bright, and she really, really wanted to go on with school. And it was at a time where her father, who had a farm in Harlem, New York, had to move because the buildings were going to go up, and he moved to a farm outside of New York in Sullivan County. We come back to that county and that farm in the other books, and she didn't want to go with him. And so she got married at 16, and she thought she'd be able to do everything she wanted. You know, lo and behold. Her sister, in the hands of women, grew up in Tilly's home. Her sister Hannah became a doctor, and she was one of the first female doctors. She went into obstetrics, which was a new profession in 1900, and she was dealing with women who were virtually getting butchered because they could not plan families. And so they went underground to take care of things. And this was a time when birth control was illegal. Diaphragms came from Germany, undercover, condoms were illegal. And so family planning was like pretty much unheard of. And so it was disastrous. Half of the terminations in New York in 1900 were married women who already had 5 or 6 kids, and they were scared to death about babies dying. 1 in 5 children died between birth and 1 year old. It was just a really, really rough time. And so she gets framed for doing an abortion, which she had not done. She did not do abortions. And she was sent to prison. And so Hannah has to really dig deep inside herself to figure out her path through this. And of course, her older sister Tilly is there to help her, she has a group of female friends who were suffragettes who were also helping her. And over there, now we take Hannah. Hannah doesn't go to France. She stays home, but her husband, Ben, becomes a doctor at the American Hospital in Paris. And Tilly's daughter, Miriam, who's a nurse, finds her way to the front, following her brand new husband, Eli, who's a surgeon. So the 3 of them are in France in different places, dealing with different aspects of tending the injured. And Hannah, who's now nearing retirement in her 40s, stays back. She stays back to take care of the children that she and Ben have, who are reacting to the war and reacting to their fear of not seeing their father. She's also tending her obstetrical patients who were left pregnant when their husbands went overseas, and they're scared to death that their children are never going to meet their father. So she's in this, except on the other side.
So Jane, through your books, your trilogy collection, do you share some of this knowledge in the books and storytelling?
Oh yeah, as much as I can without it being a history lesson. I mean, the trick in historical fiction is to integrate the history in such a way that it's not like you're getting fed it. It's like it's through osmosis. So as you are following the characters and learning about the environment they're living in, you're also describing what it was like then. So you're learning what people ate for breakfast. You're learning how people got from point A to point B. You're learning a lot about medicine. But the whole idea of historical fiction is that you learn about that period of history through the story, and the story is always about people because humans have never changed. You go back to books from biblical times, and humans were the same as we are today. We loved, we hated, we got jealous. I mean, all of those things. Those are all human emotions, and that part of us has never changed. So I think it's an interesting experiment for a writer to drop a character into a different time period and tell a human story in that setting.
So, Jane, how do you balance your deep research with storytelling that feels human and alive?
And my life? Oh, easy. I write in the morning. I don't have all the cylinders going after lunch. It's a lot of medication I'm on, and I'm sharpest in the morning. That's when the words come. And after lunch, I read, I nap, I meet up with friends for lunch and, have a lovely time chatting about our lives. And so I think the challenge would have been if I had continued working and tried to integrate writing. I don't think I would have had the capacity to do all that. But when I retired, I was a type A personality. I had to have something very substantial to do.
But Jane, I want to talk about the book. Before we went live, you told me there's a new book coming out in June of next year. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the new book is called Mayhem in the Mountains. So Sullivan County is the home of the Catskill Mountains in New York. And the Catskill Mountains started out as farming communities, and they over time became hotel communities where people went in the summer to get out of the heat in New York. And there were a lot of ethnic hotels. So a lot of Greeks and Jewish people and Italian people were not really welcome in the mainstream hotels. And so they built their own. And so and some of them were glorious hotels. They were where a lot of comedians got started. And in the common vernacular of Jewish hotels, they were called the Borscht Belt. And borscht being the soup from Russia that the Jewish immigrants brought to the United States with them. So that's where the name comes from. But in my book, Tilly's father, Sam, takes his farm from Harlem to Sullivan County, which later becomes the hotel county. But that is, for the period that this story's in, it was a poultry farm. And Sam raised chickens. The land was very rocky, and there were not a lot of, farmers who grew wheat or those kinds of produce. And so there were that's where a lot of the war horses that were trained over there. Anyway, so Mayhem in the Mountains takes place in the Catskills. And the focal point is the farm, Sam's farm, that's now run by one of his sons. And Tilly's first child, Julian, has a daughter and son, and they are miserable. Dad has a ton of problems, serious problems, has left mom, and is trying to make them work hauling ice during the summer for ice boxes in Brooklyn. And so the older child, Ella, takes her younger brother. And this, by the way, is from a true story in my family. So it has its origin in truth. And they run away. There's no Washington Bridge or GW Bridge. So they take a ferry over to New Jersey from New York. And on that ferry, they meet the gangster Dutch Schultz. Now, 1924 was during Prohibition, and New York got a lot of their alcohol from Canada. And the Canadians ran it down through upstate New York, right through Sullivan County. And this gangster also in real life, Dutch Schultz, had his own brewery underground beneath a turkey farm, right in an adjacent county. And so Mayhem in the Mountains is about the years after the war, when, again, a period where we don't zoom in a lot to country living and how these people were affected by the war and also by prohibition. But when I was researching, I stumbled on a fact that, again, people don't know about, and that is that the Ku Klux Klan made its way up to upstate New York following the war, and they were trying to push out the immigrants. And that became the third variable that played into the story, and it made it so fascinating for me. They didn't last long. The governor of New York pushed them back out, but not before they had created a bit of mayhem. And that on top of the bootleggers was a lot.
So
So
did the bootleggers come from Canada? Most of them?
no, they were like
They were from
bad,
all over, right?
mostly bad boys from New York, Lower Manhattan. And
I gotta say, us bad Canadians.
oh, you're Canadian?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's very fascinating. I mean, a lot of the alcohol came from Canada, and there were all sorts of traps across the border. And I did a bunch of research on that, but that really wasn't necessarily pertinent to my story, because my story was really what happened after. And then how did they protect their whiskey, and where did they hide it? And so all of that plays into this story. And the one thing that I really want to say is, I love speaking to audiences, and I speak to a lot of audiences that are not Jewish. And that's actually my favorite audience, because the story of the Jewish immigrants over time is exactly the same as every other immigrant group. And being a healthcare person, I know that beneath our beliefs and our religions and our skin color, we're exactly the same. And we react to illness the same way. We're just all human. And
Yeah.
so I really like seeing the universality of the experience. And I write about the Jewish people because I'm Jewish, and it's just, they say, write what you know. And so I dig into that well of knowledge and experience when I write. But I mean, it could be anyone's story. And I'd like to just share a little tidbit of research I came up again. I was reading about letters that the U.S. Army had in their archives from World War I, and this letter home from an Italian soldier who was in the hospital. He had gotten shot in the leg, and the 20% of the Army was made up of immigrants, which was an astounding percentage. And they had to be sent to special training camps to make sure they spoke English. And they mixed them up, so they didn't, kind of default to their own heritage. So this Italian soldier met this Jewish soldier in his training camp, and they became friendly by the time they got to Europe. And so this Italian soldier gets shot in the leg, and he falls down, and he looks up, and there's a German soldier about to bayonet him. And he figures this is it. And all of a sudden, the German soldier falls down to his side, and he looks over, and it was his Jewish friend who shot him. And he writes this letter home to his mother from the hospital, and he said, we grew up 3 blocks from each other, and you never let us go over to the Lower East Side because you didn't trust the Jews. And he never was allowed to go into the Italian neighborhoods because he thought he'd get robbed. And here we find ourselves in France in a world war, and he has saved my life. And he is now more of a brother to me than my natural brothers. And it was a turning point in American culture after this war, in that it was the first time there was like forced assimilation, that all of these people got together for a common cause, and they had to learn trust, because soldiers have to trust each other. And in that exercise, a lot of barriers were broken down. And when they returned, society changed. People went into businesses together, people hired each other. I mean, it was just a different world. And you see that out in American neighborhoods now.
Well, Jane, if anybody wanted to get your books or to learn more about Matilda's fund, I want to, and the OCRA, how can they reach out to you? Could you just spell out your website and that as well for the audio listeners?
Right. Everything you can get through my website is a conduit to Amazon, to for buying books, to the Matilda Fund. I have a blog that I write a couple times a month about my writing life, about things in the books, the things in the history that can't make it into the books because of the limitations of the story. And so I think a lot of that is like the letters, very, very interesting. And I also have some of my favorite TV shows and books that I've read on it. I try to make it sort of a go-to site for people who are looking for ideas. And the Matilda Fund has its own tab.
So if you could spell out your website for the listeners, Jane.
Okay, it's the banner beneath your face showing in the podcast. Well, it's www.janeloeb, L-O-E-B, Rubin, RUBIN.com. And that's my website. And so if you go to that and just spend some time browsing, you're going to find a lot of interesting things. There's also discussion questions for book clubs. And if you would like me to zoom in, particularly for your Canadian listeners, I would be more than happy to if I can make the time. Sometimes I ask book clubs to each throw in a few dollars to the Matilda Fund as a way to thank me for my time, and also to help other women. And I have raised several $1,000s this year doing that, which makes me feel really good.
Well, Jane, you know, I love having guests on from different countries because I learned the history of that country. And I think that we all, like you said, we all suffer the same way. All have illnesses. We all overcome stuff. We all come through challenges and have our own stories, right? And that's why I love bringing different types of history to the table. And we learn from each other, right? The American history from the Canadian history, and Canadian bootlegging going into the American countries. You know, we learn so much. What is your final message to all the listeners out there about historical stories?
I think that it's very important to learn history. And whether you do it from reading novels or watching series on TV or reading nonfiction, it is so important to inform us about lessons that we have already learned in the past. And it's a very cautionary they are cautionary tales to help us prevent repeating those mistakes. And I do think that when we ignore the past and take our learning off of TikTok and little sound bites on social media, we really cheat ourselves out of understanding the nuances of that time. And the nuances are what makes a difference. And you just never get that deep on social media. So I just, that would be my message. I just think that understanding history helps us understand some of the foolishness today. And
Absolutely.
and you can't deny that fact base. It's not like it's already happened. No one's making it up. It contains so much wisdom.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to do a closing summary of today's tea time, and we're going to wrap it up, and then we'll be back at 7 p.m. with a second tea time tonight with Eric Fisher, and he'll be coming in and talking about his book called Buried Alive.
Wow.
What an extraordinary tea time, Jane. Thank you for carrying us through eras of courage and sacrifice with such honesty and grace. You reminded us that history is not just something we read about, it is something we feel. It lives in wounds, and it is victories in loss and in resilience. This afternoon, we learned that storytelling preserves the voices history tries to whisper. Your books do not just teach, they testify. They stand in honor of the forgotten and in the gratitude for those who served in silence. To everyone watching, may you leave this afternoon remembering that your life, too, is history in the making. Your endurance is a legacy worth telling. Until the next cup poured, keep honoring the stories that shape you and the courage that carries you forward.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you so much, Jane. It was a pleasure.